Hey everyone, we're gonna cover colors now and start to move things around. So let's get right to it. Let's take a look at how we define colors. Here's RGB, which stands for red, green, and blue. And this is how we're going to be defining colors throughout our code. And these RGB values, well, they accept a value from between 0 to 255. And 0 is the lowest intensity, and 255 is the highest intensity of that color. So in code, it's going to look something like this, where we use this fill function to define a color of a shape before we call the shape function. So here, say we give this fill 255 for red and 0 for green and blue. The outcome color should be just red. And same goes for green, if we did this. For blue, same thing. But say we give it all the intensity of 0, we get black. And the opposite would be all highest intensity, which is white. And right now, we have this background that's white. Let's take a look at background. And you can see that, hey, the background function uses the same RGB. So you can see that we're going to be using this RGB throughout our code in places where we're going to be dealing with colors, which is also having to do with drawing lines or masking an image with a certain hue. So anything to do with colors is going to be using RGB values when we work with our code. And say, let's give our background a different color. So here we gave it all 0 for black. And I hope you're getting the picture so far. We could go a step further and predefine a color. Like so. And here in the highlight, we can see that it says var for variable, which is something that we're going to be using a lot. We're defining something called variable with a name, myRed. So myRed is something you define. We just called it myRed, but myRed is gonna be, myRed is equal to this color of this RGB value. And then later, we can use this variable, like how we used it down here in fill, myRed. We can just replace the RGB value for the variable we predefine. So that's one way to preserve and reuse colors in code. Let's take a look at this code. So up here we create a variable called myBlue, and we are defining the color down here and assigning it to myBlue. The reason for this is, for simplicity's sake, we are creating something called the global variable, which is outside of any function here. And that means this variable will be available all throughout our code. And the reason why we have to assign the color here within the setup, or within, we could also do it within draw, but the reason why we're doing it here is because color is a function that comes with P5 library. So we can only call it within setup or draw, or within any other function that we'll be seeing later that P5 library is a part of. So, for now, this is the structure that you'll be seeing. And once we define it down here, as we saw in our examples, we're assigning it to the fill, and we're drawing a circle here. So let's test this code. As expected, we're seeing this blue. And here's another use of variable that I think is really interesting. A good note is there are variables already assigned by P5 library, such as, let's try one. Let's say we have something called frame count, and say 45, and say like something like 120. So frame count is actually P5 library's way of keeping track of what frame it's on currently in this loop. So when it first starts, you're on frame 0, and then you go through the loop, and then now you're on frame 1, and then you go through and frame through 2, and so on and so forth. So this keeps track of frame count, meaning each iteration this is going to count up, right? So we'll see the effects of that. We could play this and see how gradually the red is getting more and more intense until it finally hits the max red intensity, and it just sits there at pink. So here we are with variables and colors, and we'll be seeing more examples using variables because this is sort of core part of programming. Okay, so here we have another example of P5 library's predefined variables. So here's mouse X and mouse Y being assigned to our circle or ellipse. So when we run this, our circle will be drawn where our mouse is at each iteration of the frame. So that's a little more interesting now that the player could interact with this game world. So this is it for this video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.